Do you feel sufficiently validated in your life, in yourself, your relationships? Well, in this and the next 2 episodes, you'll discover exactly what you need to know about the important and often misunderstood topic of validation. We'll look at seeking validation from others, self-validation, and how you can validate others for a more connected human experience. Today, we'll do the groundwork where I'll be answering the questions. What is validation? Are validation and approval the same thing? Why does validation matter? Then we'll look at some of the myths about seeking validation from others, and you'll find out the one key discernment you need to make before looking for validation outside of yourself. So, stay with me and let's dive into the validation series, part 1, seeking validation from others. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow, and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff, well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed NPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. I'm delighted that you're here. We are at episode 120, which means, as you'll know if you're a regular listener, that you can find the show notes at www.beabrillianthuman.com/120. And if you're brand new, welcome. I wonder if it's validation that's brought you along, in which case you're in for a treat over these next 3 episodes. If you like it, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button, depending on where you're listening. And I always ask, if you do like it, tell someone about it. That's a wonderful way to share the podcast and help a fella out. Now today, this series is sponsored. Yes, I got sponsorship. Well, okay, let's admit it. I got sponsorship from myself. It's a big day. We're going to talk about that. I thought I'd manifest what I want to manifest. So it's sponsored by NPA Mastery, which is our certified NPA practitioner program. And the link to tell you up front, if you want to go and visit that, is www.thenpaacademy.com/NPA Mastery. Check out all the details there. Also, which I don't say on the sexy ad, which I hope you listen to in the middle, that I made for you. You can check out the details. You can register right there, or if you want to have a chat with me about it personally, just there's a button on the page that says book a call. We can chat it through if that's what you'd like to do. And at the time of this recording, the next intake is in progress, and the course starts. The next one starts on March 13th. This is in 2022. If you're listening way in the future, check the website. It will have the next intake and when the next course starts. And speaking of dates, I cannot let this episode pass by without mentioning the date. As a kind of hobbyist numerologist, today is it's Tuesday, second day of the week, 22nd of the 2nd, 2022. That's a lot of twos, and actually it's one of those interesting dates that, I mean, numerologically speaking, there's a lot going on there. But it's actually a palindrome, which means, forwards or backwards, it comes out the same. 222 being the master number, 22. Oh, there's so much I could say. In fact, today has been dubbed in the press as Tuesday, TWOSDAY. And 2 is kind of all about collaboration, relationships, togetherness. And it's also kind of about duality and polarity. Today kind of is about making choices and manifesting. So hence the sponsorship, right? I'll attack today. Why not set the energy for sponsorship, even if I am sponsoring myself? But it's all part of the fun. Also, this is episode 120. The next one's 121. Then it's 122 over this 3-part series. Again, a lot of twos, but it's perfect for the topic of the series, which is validation, which in my mind is one of the keys to solid, healthy relationships, balanced personalities, and embracing, of course, our brilliant human selves. So you ready to dive in? Let's do that groundwork. So let's start right at the core of it. What is validation? Well, the official description of that, according to, I think it's dictionary.com, or one of those, is validation is the recognition and acceptance of another person's thoughts, feelings, sensations, and behaviors as understandable. Now, it says another person's thoughts, but validation, when it comes to self-validation, which we'll get to next week, it's, of course, validation or recognition and acceptance of our own thoughts, feelings, sensations, and behaviors as understandable. And that's one of the really key things here, is as understandable. Because one of the things to understand about validation, we're going to get into this in a moment in more detail, is that the fact that you can just understand why someone might feel a certain way, for example, if you're doing emotional validation. So that's the fundamental premise. Now, one of the confusions I wanted to address is the difference between validation and approval. Validation versus approval. Are they the same? Are they different? Do they mean different things? Well, actually, there's a very key discernment that I'm going to offer you here about the difference. Because you'll get things about, gaining approval from others versus getting validation from others, all these kind of things. And today we're talking about seeking validation from others. And we'll get into that. But what's the difference between validation and approval? Well, validation is acceptance, recognition, it's witnessing. Now, one of the key things here with validation is it doesn't require approval or even agreement. You don't have to agree with someone to validate what they're feeling. You don't even have to agree with yourself. You can still validate yourself. You can still validate others. Now, approval is a bit different because approval comes with implicit agreement. And it can even imply that permission is granted. And if it implies permission is granted, I approve of you being a certain way, therefore permission's required. And whose permission do you require? Now, with self-approval, of course, you need your own permission, I suppose. But in the context of, with others, whether you're seeking approval, or approving of someone else, there's a lot that goes in there that's about permission and an agreement. And that's not required for validation, which is it's a wonderful thing about, focusing on validation over approval. Not that approval is necessarily a bad thing, but we're just focusing today on validation. And the other distinction I want to make is when you think about that, this is where I believe that validation is more in what I would call the new paradigm energy as opposed to the old paradigm. Early in the world of NPA, and by the way, I suppose I should, whenever I start mentioning NPA, I think, well, there's a newbie might go, what the hell is he talking about, NPA? NPA stands for non-personal awareness. There's a simple 6-line process that you can get hold of on any of my websites, including the NPA Academy or Joel Young NPA. 6-line process that helps you stop taking things personally. Beneath the bonnet of that, if you get into the NPA world, you discover there's the philosophy of non-personal awareness, and ultimately, when it comes to using it in your practice one-to-one, it is about the agendaless way, about a frictionless experience of working with people, and so much more. But one of the fundamental parts of the non-personal philosophy is the distinction between old paradigm, which is the sort of Newtonian physics thing of things are solid and separate, therefore fairly rigid, versus the more quantum, the modern science, the latest scientific understanding of reality, which is everything is energy, and therefore is more dynamic and fluid. Now, if you look at the difference between validation and approval, validation is fluid. Validation is fluid because it's unconditional, it's dynamic, it doesn't require approval. And approval is static, it's dependent, it's fixed. So just kind of illustrate that, then approval of a certain feeling, I approve of you feeling that way. I approve of that. That means I agree with it. I think it's right. But if the feeling changes, right? Oh dear, you are no longer approved. Better pull yourself together and toe the line and have a feeling that I approve of. That's where it's fixed, and it's dependent on someone else's permission or agreement about it. That's where approval is kind of fixed and dependent again. Whereas validation is unconditional, dynamic, because validation is really witnessing, and it just witnesses and recognizes a feeling and shows empathy and understanding for why they might feel that way. And if the feeling changes, well, great, I can witness, recognize, and understand that. So it's dynamic, it changes with the feeling. Even if feelings change, there can still be validation of that, whereas approval may be conditional. And after all, as humans, our feelings more often than not, let's be real, in flux. So validation was able to move and go with you. Hence, I say it aligns with the non-personal perspective, the non-personal energy, where we're going in the world in this 2022 day. In a world where we're manifesting something more fluid, more dynamic, something that navigates alongside our collectiveness, our individuality, all of it. So that's kind of a big difference between the two. But why? Why does validation even matter? Well, it's a thing. It's a human thing. The fact is that we need it as part of our interrelating and inner well-being. It's part of being a mammal. It's part of being, I guess, sort of a herd creature, really. There's that sense of being validated and feeling like we're okay. Now, the trouble is, the idea of validation can get skewed. It's by various ideologies and sort of there's certain psychological imbalances that tend to skew the idea of, validation. Basically, they say it's a bad thing. And that can lead to, very unhealthy relationships, or crippling low self-esteem, or limitations on life, even self-damaging behaviors. It's basically, the idea that, validation is somehow needy or unempowered or weak or vulnerable, that kind of thing. But if you take it in a healthy way, validation, that can lead to super stable, thriving relationships, rock solid self-esteem, and unlimited possibilities and self-empowered choices. So when it comes to seeking validation from others, this is where, I was talking about how it can get skewed by certain ideologies. That whole idea of seeking validation as others is often seen as bad. In fact, when you look on the internet, there's a lot of articles and YouTube videos that say, stop seeking validation from others. I think the sponsoring energy of that is that, again, it's that idea that if you're seeking validation from others, then somehow you're not empowered. You're not a boss, an empowered man, an empowered woman. You're needy, you're weak, you're vulnerable. It's somehow less spiritual, or I don't know, all those kind of ideas that say don't seek validation from others. But this is a Be a Brilliant Human show, right? And we're human. We're naturally inclined to seek out others and look for mutual support. And ideally, of course, we can decrease our need for validation. That's the genuine neediness. There's a difference between neediness and like a need in the moment. We're going to go into that in depth. And we can sometimes we need to increase our ability to self-validate, which we'll cover in detail in part 2. But it's certainly my suggestion to you that there's nothing intrinsically wrong with seeking validation from others. But there is a discernment that you need to make. And the key discernment here is what's healthy seeking a validation versus what's unhealthy in terms of seeking validation. So we're going to talk about what's healthy and what's unhealthy. We're going to start with the unhealthy after this break and a word from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by NPA Mastery. Yep, that's our very own NPA Certified Practitioner Program, where you get to up-level your one-to-one work and set yourself apart from other coaches, therapists, and facilitators as you learn NPA's unique, agendaless way which means your client sessions become effortless and resistance free. No more draining struggles and way more energy after each session. Plus, you'll be able to add the power of NPA and over 30 NPA situation-specific frames alongside whatever modalities you already use. Take your practice to the next level. Visit www.thempaacademy.com/NPA Mastery and get registered today. I'm deeply committed to helping you up-level the work you do with your clients. And here's what the graduate NPA Mastery participants say.
Buckle up, baby, for some turbocharged personal development.
This is by far my most favorite program ever. And believe me, I've had so many programs.
It's a holding your hand all the way through, teaching, using his experience, which is amazing. I've never had case studies done that well in my other courses. That I feel that it's a real learning experience. And he wants us to up level. That's one of his things. And yeah, up leveling right from the beginning. And from the first 5 minutes. But it's really great because I'm feeling that difference in working with other people, in how I am as I am working with those people, and to make it more easy.
And I could see the result. I could see the effect of that in my work with clients immediately. And it just gets better as we go further through the program.
I've learned how much of an agenda I did have when I thought I was pretty agendaless. So the agendalessness of becoming a practitioner opens up a vastness in my own practice that I just didn't realise was available to me.
It's the first time when somebody takes my hand and takes me by my hand and takes me through real intricacies and nuances of what it is to be a practitioner, to be a therapist.
Even though it's online, and I've been on other online things and you're drained at the end in front of a computer, this is the one where I don't feel drained. Like, because we laugh so much, it's so much fun, and the way it's taught, I don't feel drained at the end of 8 hours on a computer, even though that's a lot of time.
It's deep and powerful and profound. The promise that Joel's making about how agendalessness will improve your effectiveness as a facilitator and as a therapist, that is not an empty promise.
I'd love you to join us, so go to www.theNPAacademy.com/NPA Mastery and get registered today. All right, welcome back. And we left off with what is the key discernment, which is what's healthy seeking versus unhealthy seeking. So, to put it in a nutshell, the unhealthy seeking is going to have kind of a craving quality to it. It's sort of ongoing, ever-present kind of craving that can't be filled. Whereas the healthy stuff is more of an honest acknowledgement of a passing desire. But let's break it down into more detail. So, unhealthy seeking. And before I dive into that, it's like, I want you to think about it in terms of flavor. It's not like you're going to say, well, I'm a person who does unhealthy seeking and I'm a person that does healthy seeking. That's just not how it works. There'll be times and moments where, you know, as you notice within yourself and you can kind of report on yourself, you know, where's this really coming from? You know, and it's also a good guide because, you know, there may be certain contexts, for example, like where you get into an intimate relationship and suddenly when you're fine with validating yourself and you don't need much validation from others, suddenly you get very needy for validation in a, you know, say in a sexual relationship, or that. So there'll be situational times where you'll notice the behaviors within you change because we're complex beings. It's not like just a black and white thing. But in terms of in general terms, like I think it's really good to be mindful of spotting where it's okay and you're being healthy in your approach to seeking validation from somebody else. And when it's really coming from a place that maybe needs some work or needs a bit of looking at. So, that being said, unhealthy seeking. So, unhealthy seeking is where your sense of self is dependent on another's validation. That's how come the craving comes in. So looking for validation where, who you are as a person, is whether they validate or make it right or not is going to be either crippling or just that would be really nice to have. When it's got that kind of edge of, craving, that's where, the craving, it means it goes from being a genuine need, it becomes a neediness. And I imagine most of us have been in a situation where somebody is craving that validation, that approval, with approval and validation, but they need that validation to a point where it becomes insatiable. That's one of the clues. If no matter how much validation you get, you're still feeling that needy kind of pull. I need more, give me more. It's never enough. Anything external, it's like meeting a bottomless pit. And you kind of got to be honest with yourself about this, because it's hard. It's hard to be honest that we've got a bottomless pit and we just kind of got this craving for other people to validate us so that we can feel good about ourselves. Normally that's indicative if there's a strong identification, there's a fundamental insecurity that's at play, the thing is, it's okay. We all need a pick-me-up from time to time. This is part of why I'm doing this and talking about that discernment, because a lot of times, just a very honest, request for validation or just a sense of needed desire for validation, which we'll get into in the healthy section, is then written off by somebody else as the neediness. So it's important to know for yourself what the difference is. But basically, if that sort of seeking validation from others becomes a way of life, you're probably firmly in that craving, insatiable department of unhealthy seeking. So, because apart from anything else, getting external validation, it's not sustainable over time. Again, if you've been sort of in a relationship with anybody, or you've been the person in the relationship that has that sort of empty, unfillable space of need for that validation, you'll know it's not sustainable. Sometimes we need little hits, just give me a hit of validation. That's very different to when it's sort of constant, and no one can keep that up. So often it will, be the cause of a breakup in relationship. And again, it's one of those things where it could be you, it could be another person, but it's to recognize the difference. Now, the other part of validation is kind of being seen. And in a way, when it comes to unhealthy seeking, it's being seen the way you want to be seen. It really can be part of a healthy validation, but when there's that sort of strong sense of identification, attachment to it, and so the validation has to come in a certain way, it can become very forceful. And in fact, that really isn't validation you're looking for. It's kind of projected judgment that's coming through. And it kind of creates that sort of division and separation, because what you're trying to do is to convince them to say things in a way you want them to say, which is very different from seeking that understanding or looking to be understood in what you mean, or being seen in the way that you want to see. So again, there's that subtle sort of energetic pressure that comes into play when it comes to being seen. Now, that the hook of this is often that we're sort of needing to prove or disprove something about ourselves. And it's normally something that we secretly believe is true. That's the thing I took straight from Byron Katie. She often says about criticism, if you take criticism badly, it's something that you secretly believe is true. But when it comes to validation, which is like the opposite, when there's that sense of that craving aspect to it, it normally comes down to the proving or disproving or something. So what do I mean by that? It's like proving that you're worthy or disproving that you're unworthy. One side of that coin, that's just one example. It could be all sorts of things, that you're sexy, that you're capable. There's all sorts of underlying aspects of a personality that can sort of fall into this bracket. And when this kind of unhealthy seeking, goes really bad, we see, and societally, it's pretty prevalent. The unhealthy need of validation. You get like the sort of the shitty end of the Instagram culture, where the number of likes and followers that you have equates to your sense of worth. Which takes you down a very dodgy road where you start selling your integrity for the sake of that validation and approval, and this isn't new, by the way, to social media. This is as old as the hill. It's part of the landscape of our human psychology. So anywhere where you spot some kind of insatiability, unfillableness, so it's sort of ongoing, and it's like you need that sort of the drip, the needle constantly in your arm. You've got that craving. If there's any sniff or flavor of that, then chances are you're veering into the unhealthy seeking of validation, and that's where that means there's work to do. You can get support for that. You can come and check out on joelyoungmpa.com/sessions, get some sessions with me to support you through the work, or do the work by yourself. There's lots of different ways, or see somebody else. It's like, but that's where some inner work and help can really help you bring that back into balance. Now, healthy seeking validation from others, this is different. Remember that the difference between validation and approval is that there's the dynamic thing and then the fixed thing. Often the unhealthy seeking of validation, it has more of that flavor of, it's got a rigidity around it. Hence, you can't ram a square peg into a round hole kind of thing. But healthy seeking is really about acknowledging our desires, our needs, and ultimately our humanity. Now, this comes from humility, actually, acknowledging our humanity. Remember that, feeling understood and accepted, it's a basic herd need. We are an animal at our core. And the humility of it is accepting, help and support, that there are others. This is interdependence, as distinct from independence, which is there's that myth of independence. There's no way we're independent. We rely on each other. Even if you're out there in the wilds, there's a certain human independence required, but you're going to rely on stuff, right? There's interdependence at play. And it's also independence as distinct from codependence, which is where you get a lot of that unhealthy seeking happening, where there's these bargains made, regardless of what people think or feel, to sort of do that. I'm going to agree with you. Even though I don't really, and rely on each other, and there's deals done that they're not necessarily good. So, but to acknowledge that you have, these passing desires or needs, just need a cuddle, or, you just need to be told that I'm beautiful, or those kind of things, that's okay. And again, the distinction is it's got that it's fillable. You get it, you go, oh, good, that's better. Thanks, honey. There's a difference there too. But do you really mean it? And then the next 5 minutes, tell me again, tell me again, tell me again, tell me again. Oh, I don't believe you. Oh, that's a very different flavor, right? But when you believe the myths that you can't seek approval from anybody, you end up, dry and alone. Because you may want at times to just say, oh, can you just tell me something nice about me? It's part of the dynamic human nature within us. So that's healthy when there's just an acknowledgement of that. It's that self-care, isn't it, really, in a way? The other thing about, seeking that kind of validation, because validation, remember, is about being seen and witnessed and accepted without needing to agree. It creates connection. It's actually part of the bonding and mating process, in humans, is that sense of validating. It's very natural when you meet someone new, isn't it? You look at them and everything is totally understandable and perfectly, acceptable and wonderful, actually. And so that connection is built already, and then the mating is inevitable if it works out, obviously. The other reason where healthy seeking is good is just in communicative terms. It's like, in terms of communication, validation is a great way, in asking for validation, of confirming that your communication is effective. Did you get that? Or can you just reflect back to me what I said so I can be sure that you got it? So there's a really genuinely good, positive reason for health, and healthy reason to go seeking validation, is to look, did I communicate that effectively? I think it's really, really good. And then again, we come back to, in a way, with that kind of thing, it's being seen and heard and understood. The difference there with being seen and understood is it's being seen and understood the way you actually are. Remember that I said in the unhealthy way, it's like the way you want to be seen. There's a very different thing to seeking to be seen, heard and understood the way you actually are. I'm going to get a lot more into, there's some interesting distinctions there. We'll get next week into self-validation, where that can go a bit skewy. So I'll leave that there for now, but we're going to come back to that a bit more deeply next week. So make sure you tune in, folks. And also, in terms of healthy seeking, it's kind of good to just knowing it's okay to feel what you feel. All feelings are valid. It doesn't require agreement. So really the healthy thing has a satiable quality, whether it's a temporary insecure moment because you're human and you can acknowledge that, or a communication and understanding kind of check. Those are times where that where seeking validation from somebody else is actually a really healthy self-care move. So that's a wrap for this part 1 of our 3-part series on validation. I hope you got a sense of, what validation's really about, that distinction between validation and approval, and why it matters, and why it's something that I believe should matter to you. That should in a very soft should, not like I'm going to beat you up for it if you don't. And when we came on to seeking validation from others, the main thing I really want you to take away is to have some discernment and self-reflection about the difference between the unhealthy seeking, which is fundamentally has some kind of craving or insatiability about it, versus the healthy seeking, which is an acknowledgement of your humanity. It's that humility and can be filled, it's passing in a sense. And also that within that, of course, there's going to be different circumstances that trigger off different unhealthy or healthy states, because we are complex beings. Now, of course, there will be show notes as ever. If you go to www.bebrillianthuman.com/120, you'll find the show notes for today. Again, if you need some support, some help, some professional and very expert help from my good self, go check out joelyoungmpa.com/sessions and get in touch. I currently have some space, so get in touch now. And of course, do support our sponsor. That's me again. I would genuinely love you to come along to Mastery. I say at the time of this recording, which is the 22nd of the 2nd, 2022. We're very soon about to go into the next start of NPA Mastery, our certified practitioner training. And again, you can go to www.thempaacademy.com/NPA Mastery. Check that out. Otherwise, that's me for now. I'll see you next week. Remember, next week we're looking at self-validation. You want to come back and check that out. See you next time. Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website www.BABrillianthuman.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the NPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.